What began as a routine late-night interview quickly descended into television chaos when legendary actor Robert De Niro stormed off Jimmy Kimmel Live after a brutal confrontation that left audiences stunned and social media ablaze. The atmosphere in the studio was electric as Robert De Niro stepped onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live set, his trademark intensity immediately evident to everyone present. Known for his unflinching performances and no-nonsense attitude, the legendary actor had agreed to appear on the show to promote his latest film project. What no one expected was that the night would become one of the most explosive celebrity interviews in late-night television history. Jimmy Kimmel, wearing his familiar smug grin, welcomed De Niro with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm. The audience applauded warmly as the 79-year-old acting icon took his seat in the guest chair, his weathered face carrying the gravitas that had defined his career for decades. The opening minutes unfolded normally, with Kimmel asking standard promotional questions about De Niro's upcoming film and reflecting on his storied career. However, familiar with Kimmel's interview style, knew he rarely allowed guests to leave without steering the conversation toward its controversial territory designed to generate headlines and social media buzz. This night proved no different, except Kimmel gravely underestimated his guests' tolerance for disrespect. The shift was subtle at first, as Kimmel began making increasingly personal remarks disguised as jokes. He referenced De Niro's past legal troubles, made snide comments about his age, and questioned his recent film choices with thinly veiled condescension. De Niro's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the host's deliberate attempts to provoke him for entertainment. "You know, Bobby," Kimmel said with a forced laugh, "some people are saying you should maybe think about retirement. I mean, at your age, don't you think it's time to let the younger generation take over?" The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing the inappropriateness of the remark. But Kimmel pushed on, seemingly unaware of the dangerous ground he was treading. De Niro's response was calm but firm. "I don't think age defines talent, Jimmy. I've been acting longer than you've been alive, and I'll continue as long as I have stories to tell." His voice carried a sharp edge that should have warned any experienced interviewer. But Kimmel, either emboldened by his own perceived authority or unable to read the room, doubled down. He mocked De Niro's method acting, ridiculed his preparation techniques, suggested that his intense performances were outdated in modern Hollywood. His tone grew increasingly disrespectful, treating one of cinema's greatest talents as a relic of a bygone era. The breaking point came when Kimmel brought up De Niro's political views, specifically his outspoken criticism of certain political figures. "Look, Bob, we get it. You don't like certain politicians, but don't you think actors should stick to acting instead of lecturing the American people about politics?" The question dripped with condescension, its body language implying a sense of superiority. De Niro's face darkened as he leaned forward. "Let me tell you something, Jimmy," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I've earned the right to speak my mind. I've lived through decades of American history that you've only read about in books. Don't you dare sit there and tell me what I should or shouldn't say." The studio fell silent as the audience realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Kimmel, perhaps aware he had gone too far, but unwilling to back down, made a fatal misstep. "Hey, I'm just saying what a lot of people are thinking. Maybe you should focus on making good movies instead of Twitter rants." The comment ignited something primal in De Niro. His eyes flashed with a fury rarely seen by those who knew him. "Twitter rants," he repeated, his voice rising. "You think standing up for what's right is a Twitter rant? You sit here every night making jokes about serious issues while the world burns around us, and you have the audacity to question my integrity." Now visibly nervous, but trapped by his own arrogance, Kimmel tried to deflect with humor. "Whoa, easy there, Travis Bickle," he said, referencing De Niro's iconic taxi driver character. "Are you talking to me?" The audience gasped at the inappropriate remark, and several crew members shook their heads in disbelief. The moment the words left Kimmel's mouth, something fundamental shifted in the studio atmosphere. Niro stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled, like a predator preparing to strike. The camera operators instinctively zoomed in, capturing every nuance of the actor's expression as he processed what had just occurred. "Did you just mock one of my most serious roles?" Niro asked, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of decades of artistic achievement. "Did you just trivialize a character that represents the alienation and desperation of an entire generation?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon, and everyone present understood that Kimmel had crossed a line from which there would be no return. Kimmel, his face flushed and beads of sweat forming on his forehead, realized the magnitude of his mistake, but his ego would not allow him to apologize. Instead, he doubled down with nervous laughter. "Come on, Bob. It's just a movie. We're having fun here." The host's voice cracked slightly, betraying his growing panic as he watched Niro's expression transform into something truly menacing. "Just a movie," Niro repeated, his voice now carrying the full force of his legendary intensity. That character came from months of research, living with real cab drivers, understanding their pain and isolation. You just reduced 40 years of mastery to a punchline for your pathetic comedy routine. The actor's hands were clenched at his sides, his entire body radiating controlled fury. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, many holding their breath as they witnessed what felt like a master craftsman being insulted by an amateur. Several audience members whispered nervously, while others pulled out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a historic television moment. Kimmel, sensing the shift in the room's energy, tried to regain control. "Look, I think you're taking this way too seriously. This is a comedy show, not the actor's studio. Maybe you should lighten up a little." His words fell flat, each syllable digging his grave deeper as Niro's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. "Lighten up." Niro's voice rose for the first time, causing several crew members to step back instinctively. "You invite me onto your show to promote my work, and then you spend the entire time disrespecting me, my age, my career, and my beliefs. And when I call you out on your unprofessional behavior, you tell me to lighten up." The camera operators captured every angle of the confrontation. The director, visible in the background, gestured frantically to the crew, clearly unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the drama continue. The raw authenticity of the moment was television gold, but it was completely out of control. Kimmel's producer could be seen off camera, pacing nervously and speaking urgently into his headset. The show's format had collapsed, and everyone knew they were witnessing either the biggest disaster or the most talked about moment in late-night television history. "You know what your problem is, Jimmy?" Niro continued, stepping closer to the desk. "You've never earned anything in your life. You've never struggled, never fought for respect, never had to prove yourself. You sit behind this desk making jokes about people who've actually accomplished something, and you think that makes you important." Kimmel's face turned pale, his usual confidence completely shattered. "Hey, that's not fair. I've worked hard to get where I am." His voice sounded weak and defensive, a sharp contrast to his earlier arrogance. "Hard work." Niro laughed bitterly. "You call making fun of celebrities and reading jokes written by other people hard work? I've spent 50 years perfecting my craft, working with the greatest directors in cinema history, creating characters that will outlive both of us. What's your legacy going to be, Jimmy? Bad jokes and cheap shots?" The audience was completely captivated, witnessing a real-time deconstruction of everything Kimmel represented. Viewers at home were already posting clips online, and the hashtag tied to the confrontation was beginning to trend worldwide. Kimmel, desperate to salvage some dignity, made another catastrophic error in judgment. "Look, at least I'm relevant to modern audiences. When's the last time you made a movie that anyone under 30 actually watched. The question was delivered with false bravado, but Kimmel's trembling hands betrayed his true emotional state. The insult struck Niro like a physical blow. For a moment, the legendary actor stood perfectly still, processing what he had just heard. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a coldness that made everyone in the studio uneasy. "Relevant," he said. "You think relevance comes from pandering to the lowest common denominator? You think artistic integrity is measured by ticket sales to teenagers?" The confrontation had reached a crescendo no one could have anticipated. Niro stepped forward again, now towering over Kimmel's desk with a presence that filled the entire studio. "Let me tell you about relevance. Jimmy, my work will be studied in film schools long after your show is forgotten. Students will analyze my performances. Directors will reference my techniques, and actors will try to emulate what I've achieved. What will they say about you?" Kimmel's face turned a sickly shade of green, but his wounded pride pushed him into one final, devastating mistake. "At least I don't have to live in the past," he stammered, his voice cracking with desperation. "Maybe if you spent less time lecturing people and more time actually acting, you wouldn't be so bitter about your career being over." The words hit the studio like a nuclear bomb. Several audience members gasped audibly, while others covered their faces in secondhand embarrassment. The camera crew exchanged horrified glances, knowing they were witnessing career suicide in real time. Even the usually unflappable studio band looked stunned by the host's lack of judgment. Niro's reaction was immediate and terrifying. His face twisted with rage, veins bulging on his forehead as decades of devotion to his craft crystallized into pure fury. "My career is over," he repeated, his voice loud enough to echo through the studio. "My career is over." He slammed his hand onto Kimmel's desk with such force that the coffee mug jumped, spilling across the host's note cards. Kimmel flinched, shrinking back in his chair as Niro leaned across the desk, his face inches from the trembling host. "You pathetic excuse for an entertainer," Niro snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "I was winning awards and working with Scorsese, and you were still figuring out how to tie your shoes. I've created characters that became part of American culture, while you've contributed nothing but recycled jokes and manufactured controversy." Kimmel tried to interject, raising his hands defensively. "Look, Bob, I think we should maybe calm down, and don't you dare tell me to calm down," Niro roared, cutting him off mid-sentence. The outburst was so powerful that several audience members in the front row leaned back instinctively. "You started this with your disrespectful questions, your ageist jokes, and your complete lack of professionalism. Now you want to calm down because you realize you've bitten off more than you can chew." The studio crackled with tension. Security guards, stationed around the perimeter, shifted nervously, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. The producer spoke frantically into his headset, likely receiving instructions from network executives watching the chaos unfold in real time. Kimmel, now visibly shaking, made one last desperate appeal to the audience. "Come on, everyone knows I was just joking around. This is how we do things on late-night TV." He forced a weak smile and gestured toward the crowd, hoping for support that never came. The audience remained silent, many looking embarrassed to be associated with their host's behavior. "Joking around," Niro said quietly, his tone somehow more intimidating than his earlier shouting. "You call systematic disrespect and personal attacks joking around? Is that what you told yourself when you mocked my age, my politics, and my life's work? That you were just joking?" He straightened to his full height, his presence dominating the set. "Let me explain something to you about comedy, Jimmy. Real comedy punches up, not down. It challenges power, not the powerless. It brings people together through shared humanity, not by tearing others down for cheap laughs. What you do isn't comedy. It's bullying with a laugh track." By now, clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media like wildfire. Viewers at home were posting in real time, with hashtags trending worldwide. The consensus was overwhelmingly in Diro's favor, with comments praising him for standing up to Kimmel's unprofessional behavior and calling out the host's pattern of disrespect toward guests. Kimmel, perhaps finally grasping the gravity of his situation, attempted a pathetic form of damage control. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot tonight. Why don't we start over and talk about your new movie? His voice was barely above a whisper. All of his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Niro looked at him with undisguised disgust. Start over? You think you can insult everything I stand for, mock my career, question my relevance, and then just start over like nothing happened? You've shown everyone exactly who you are tonight. Jimmy, you've revealed yourself to be a small, petty man who builds himself up by tearing others down. The legendary actor began removing his microphone, his movements deliberate and final. I came here tonight to promote my work and talk about my craft with someone I thought was a professional. Instead, I found a schoolyard bully hiding behind a desk and a television camera. As Niro unclipped the microphone pack from his jacket, the studio fell into complete silence. Even the band stopped playing, understanding they were witnessing television history in the making. The only sounds were the quiet whir of cameras and the nervous shuffling of crew members who didn't know where to look. Kimmel, his face completely drained of color, made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Bob, please, let's not end it like this. We can work this out. His voice was barely audible, stripped of all the false confidence that had defined his earlier behavior. The man who had spent the evening trying to humiliate a legend was now reduced to begging. Niro paused, fixing Kimmel with a stare that could have melted steel. Work this out. You had your chance to be respectful. You had multiple opportunities to show some class. Instead, you chose to be disrespectful, condescending, and unprofessional. There's nothing to work out, Jimmy. You've shown America exactly who you are. The actor placed his microphone on Kimmel's desk with deliberate precision, the small action carrying the weight of finality. You know what the real tragedy is? You had one of the greatest actors of all time sitting in that chair. And instead of asking about my process, my experiences working with legendary directors, or the craft I've dedicated my life to, you chose to make cheap jokes and personal attacks. Several audience members began applauding, scattered claps quickly growing into sustained applause. The support was overwhelmingly for Niro, and the message was clear. They respected his dignity and were disgusted by their host's behavior. Kimmel looked around desperately for support from his audience, but found only disappointed faces and continuing applause for his guest. This is exactly what's wrong with entertainment today, Cairo continued, his voice carrying across the silent studio with perfect clarity. Substance has been replaced by sensationalism. Respect has been sacrificed for ratings, and talent is mocked by people who wouldn't last 5 minutes doing what real artists do every day. The legendary actor began walking toward the edge of the stage, then turned back one final time to deliver a parting shot that would be replayed millions of times across social media. You want to know about relevance, Jimmy? Tomorrow morning, this confrontation will be the most talked about moment of your entire career. Not because of anything clever you said, not because of any joke you made, but because you disrespected someone who actually earned their place in this industry. Kimmel sat frozen in his chair, unable to respond. His usual quick wit had completely abandoned him. The host, who had built his career on finding the perfect comeback for every situation, was left speechless, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled for words. Niro's exit was as commanding as his presence throughout the confrontation. He walked with the confident stride of a man who had nothing to apologize for, his back straight and his head held high. As he reached the edge of the stage, the applause grew even louder, with some audience members rising to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. The cameras followed his departure, capturing every step as the greatest actor of his generation left the studio with his dignity intact. Behind him, Kimmel remained at his desk, looking smaller and more pathetic with each passing second. His usual closing routine was impossible. How do you follow the complete destruction of your credibility? As Niro disappeared backstage, the studio descended into chaos. Audience members were already uploading videos from their phones. The producer scrambled to figure out how to end the broadcast, while crew members whispered among themselves about what they had just witnessed. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within hours, clips of the confrontation had racked up millions of views across every major social media platform. The overwhelming consensus was that Niro had exposed Kimmel as an unprofessional bully who had finally targeted someone capable of fighting back. Entertainment industry insiders were quick to condemn Kimmel's behavior, noting that the incident revealed a long-standing pattern of disrespect toward guests that had gone unchecked. By the next morning, the show's ratings had plummeted as viewers voiced their disgust with Kimmel's conduct. Advertisers began pulling their support, unwilling to be associated with a host who had humiliated himself so publicly. Network executives soon realized the real damage was not to Niro's reputation, but to their own star's credibility. The incident became a watershed moment in late-night television, sparking widespread debate about the line between comedy and cruelty, entertainment and exploitation. Robert Niro, meanwhile, saw his stature rise even higher as the public rallied behind his principled stand against disrespect. His walkout became a symbol of dignity in an industry often lacking it, proving that true class and talent will always outshine cheap theatrics and manufactured controversy.